You think you can humiliate me? Think again. Welcome back to Silent Heroes. This is the channel that never forgets the quiet warriors, the ones whose courage and resilience are carved in places history doesn't dare mention. Here, we honor their stories and make sure the world remembers. The moment the vodka cranberry hit Captain Elena Frost's face, time seemed to fracture. The liquid burned her eyes, stinging and sharp, and three off-duty soldiers, laughing like predators who'd cornered easy prey, snickered at their own joke. They saw a small, solitary woman in a dimly lit dive bar, sitting quietly with her tablet, alone, harmless, a target for their amusement. They did not see the combat action ribbons hidden beneath her jacket. They could not see the fine scar that traced her temple, a souvenir from an explosion that had ripped apart the world around her years ago. They did not, and would never, guess that in less than 12 hours, those same men would stand as her subordinates. Not a clue. Elena wipes the cold alcohol from her face, the burn a whisper compared to the memory of dust and blood that never left her. The men laughed again, louder this time, their bravado swelling. "Drink it, bitch," one shouted. The words were meant to intimidate, meant to humiliate, but to Elena, they were just noise. Her gray eyes locked onto them, steady, measured, and utterly unreadable. Not a flicker of panic, not a trace of fear, just calculation, cold and precise. She sat still for a moment, letting the humiliation settle around them, knowing that the bar would be the first chapter of a story they would never forget. The tallest of the three, a corporal with a voice too confident for his own good, leaned forward, smirking, pointing at the drink-stained jacket. "Seriously, you gonna cry about it?" he jeered. Behind him, his friends cackled, egging him on. Elena's lips curved ever so slightly, not a smile, not a smirk, just the tiniest twitch. She lifted her hand slowly, brushed the remaining droplets off her sleeve with deliberate calm, and said nothing. Nothing at all. Her silence was louder than any scream, her stillness a storm. They didn't see it, couldn't see it, the way her shoulders moved, the subtle twitch in her wrist, the muscle memory of missions where hesitation meant death, where in a split second, decisions saved lives or ended them. They laughed at her stillness, and that was their first mistake. Oh, how badly they underestimated her. Elena stood, picked up her tablet, and walked toward the door as if the night had been no more than a passing breeze. The laugh that had echoed in the bar followed her out, but she carried it all with the calm of someone who had faced fire far hotter than vodka and ego. Outside, the salty winter air hit her face, sharp and bracing. She paused for a single breath, letting the bar's dim neon signs flicker against her face. The men would think they had won. They had no idea that by sunrise, the world would flit for them. Captain Elena Frost had entered their lives not as a civilian, not as a woman they could belittle, but as a commanding officer who would oversee their very next deployment. Every humiliation thrown her way would be repaid, not with vengeance, but with performance. They would learn respect, discipline, and the weight of underestimation. Back in the bar, the corporal who had thrown the drink leaned back chuckling, entirely unaware of the storm he had brushed against. "She's nothing," he said to his friends. Elena Frost, nothing. That word would haunt him. Every decision, every order he would obey from now on would remind him that he had judged a lion by its silence. The woman who walked past their laughter carried decades of training, hundreds of missions, scars and medals, and a mind sharpened to absolute precision. They saw only the small exterior. The battlefield inside her mind was vast and untouchable. As she entered her vehicle later, reviewing the mission schedules on her tablet, the memory of the bar lingered not as a slight, but as fuel. The three soldiers had no idea they would soon report directly to her. They had no inkling that every drill, every maneuver, every order they'd follow would be under the scrutiny of someone who had seen fire, loss, and the edge of death far closer than they ever imagined. And yet, in the quiet glow of the dashboard, she allowed herself the faintest smile. Not a smile of satisfaction, not yet, but of recognition. The night's chaos had set the stage for something far greater, something inevitable. The first rays of dawn filtered across the base, cold and silver, brushing over the training grounds where Elena would soon meet her unit. Inside, Lieutenant Frost reviewed deployment rotations, movements calculated with surgical precision. Every step she would command, every strategy she would enforce, had been rehearsed in her mind countless times. The bar incident had been a test, unplanned but perfect, a reminder that underestimation was a luxury no professional could afford. The three men, oblivious to her true identity, would become living lessons in respect. By the time the men arrived at morning briefings, hungover and still carrying their inflated confidence, they were walking into the lair of the very officer they had humiliated. Captain Elena Frost entered the room with an ease that belied the fire in her veins. Gray eyes scanning the room, noting weaknesses, strengths, potential. She didn't rush, she didn't shout, but the weight of her presence was immediate, a gravitational pull that made the air itself tremble. The men who had laughed the night before felt it first in their stomachs, then in their hearts. They recognized her. Not fully, not yet, but they felt it. The aura of a seasoned warrior who had survived more combat missions than they had years of life. And in that instant, every ounce of arrogance they carried evaporated under the cold realization that the person they thought weak was in every possible metric that mattered, superior. They would not speak first. They would not act first. For the first time in their lives, they would be truly measured. The bar, the humiliation, the laughter, it had all been irrelevant. Elena Frost had walked away. They would follow her orders now. They would obey. And they would remember every sting, every laugh, every foolish assumption that had led them to this precipice. Captain Elena Frost, calm, poised, lethal in silence, had claimed victory not with a gun, not with brute force, but with the certainty of someone who had been underestimated and thrived because of it. Outside, the base hummed with preparation, helicopters warming up, and the first light catching the edge of her blade-sharp focus. Elena looked down at her tablet, tracing the upcoming exercises, live-fire drills, and tactical simulations. Every move would test the men from the bar, strip away the remnants of arrogance, and rebuild them in the image of professionalism. By the end of her first command, they would not remember the vodka cranberry, they would remember her. Every lesson would carry the weight of consequence. Every order would echo with her experience. And somewhere deep in the marrow of their bones, they would understand that disrespect was not tolerated, ignorance was corrected, and true leadership demanded obedience and reverence. The three soldiers, waiting unknowingly, were about to discover exactly what it meant to misjudge a warrior. Elena Frost had already planned every moment, calculated every response, anticipated every weakness. She moved through the base with deliberate steps, each one silent but commanding. She didn't need to shout. Her reputation, though unseen by them, preceded her like a shadow they could not outrun. And in that quiet, measured presence, the first 12 hours of consequence began ticking. A countdown to transformation, accountability, and respect earned the only way it could be, through performance under the unwavering gaze of someone who had survived the unimaginable. You think this is hard? Try keeping up with me. Welcome back again to Silent Heroes, the channel where bravery is measured not by medals alone, but by the scars unseen, the missions untold, and the battles fought in silence. Here, we remember the unsung warriors, the ones who train, sweat, and bleed so others may survive. The first morning, the three soldiers who had humiliated Captain Elena Frost arrived at the training compound, rubbing their eyes and nursing the hangovers that blurred the edges of their confidence. Elena stood before them, calm, composed, and impossibly small in stature, but monumental in presence. No preamble, no mercy. "Gear up," she said, voice low, flat, yet carrying authority that made even the air stiffen. They thought this would be a routine warm-up. They thought wrong. The first drill began with a live-fire room clearing. Simulated rounds cracked through the air like jagged glass. Elena moved first, precise, economical, lethal. Every corner, every doorway, every potential threat anticipated. The soldiers followed, but hesitation, fumbling, and poor angles cost them. Elena's eyes flicked between them, silent at first, then a sudden sharpness cutting through. "Move! Your hesitation gets someone killed." Her words were a whip, stinging, and they snapped to attention, adrenaline spiking, muscles screaming against fear. Urban combat exercises came next. Smoke, chaos, chaos designed to confuse, disorient, and break the mind before it could even think clearly. Elena pushed them harder, faster, through narrow alleys, up stairwells slick with simulated blood and debris. Every mistake, missed cover, sloppy communication, slow reaction was met with immediate correction. Sometimes she shouted, voice booming across the concrete canyon. Other times she was silent, moving beside them like a shadow, demonstrating the precise angle, the exact movement, the only correct response. Every correction was a lesson in humility, every failure a reminder that underestimation could kill. Maritime boarding exercises followed, the ocean wind biting, waves slapping against their training boats. Torres, the youngest, panicked when the boat swayed violently, the water swallowing his sense of control. Elena was already in the water, hands on his chest, steady, commanding. "Focus. The water is not your enemy. You are. Control it or it controls you." Her voice cut through the roar of the waves. She pulled him to stability, but the lesson was burned into his mind. Panic is death. Control is life. And every trainee felt the chill of realization. They were not dealing with someone ordinary. Obstacle courses, night navigation, survival scenarios designed to break the body and warp the mind came next. Elena demanded perfection, but she demanded more: adaptability, resilience, mental acuity under pressure. The soldiers stumbled, fell, and cursed. Elena corrected them, sometimes with sharp words, sometimes with silence that was far more cutting. "Again, no excuses," she barked during a timed rope climb. Muscles screamed, lungs burned, and the three men who had laughed at her just days ago began to understand the magnitude of her command. Underwater egress training pushed the final boundary. Boats capsized, oxygen tanks malfunctioned, panic threatened to swallow Torres once more. Elena descended into the swirling water, a lifeline of calm certainty in a sea of chaos. "Do you control the fear, or does it control you?" she asked. She guided him, step by step, until he emerged, gasping and humbled. And every failure, every small triumph was punctuated by the reality that Elena Frost's standards were absolute. There was no room for ego, for arrogance, for assumptions based on appearance. Each evening, after the trainees collapsed, Elena reviewed their progress meticulously. Maps, performance logs, psychological observations, stress reactions, all cataloged with surgical precision. She did not gloat, did not celebrate. She planned. Every next drill, every new challenge was calculated to push them further than they imagined possible, to force them into realization that their previous laughter at her expense had been ignorance at its worst. Week 3 brought the most punishing trial yet, a simulated direct action mission gone catastrophically wrong. Night insertion, denied terrain, hostile simulation units hunting them relentlessly. Vance, once arrogant and careless, now led a team that faltered under the first obstacle. Elena shadowed them, correcting angles, movement, exposure, every single error. Her tone shifted with the moment, calm when guidance was needed, sharp when errors repeated, and occasionally silent, letting the weight of her presence alone instill urgency. By dawn, the team had survived the night, not unscathed, but transformed. Each morning drill reinforced the same brutal truth. "You are not here to prove anything to me," Elena said one day, voice steady, eyes flashing. "You are here to prove it to yourselves. Every mistake you've made, every laugh, every glance of doubt does not define you. What defines you is what you do after you fail. Correct, adapt, overcome." The soldiers, once smug, once dismissive, now moved with awareness, every muscle trained, every instinct sharpened. They had been reshaped under pressure, molded by experience, and every misstep served as a reminder of the price of ignorance. By the 5th week, the trainees had endured 72-hour field exercises, rucks weighing 65 pounds, navigating rugged terrain, managing casualties, calling for support, adjusting for environmental variables they never thought they'd encounter. Every time they faltered, Elena was there, silently correcting, subtly guiding, instilling discipline with a gaze, a touch, a single command. Exhaustion and fear became their constant companions, but so did respect, understanding, and the sharp realization of her absolute competence. The shocking twist of every scenario was not just in physical correction, it was psychological, relentless. The 3 soldiers who had laughed in a dive bar now wrestled with guilt, humility, and awe. They had underestimated the small, solitary woman who had walked past them. Every time they corrected a teammate, every time they survived a drill, every time they completed an objective, they remembered her presence, sometimes shouting, sometimes silent, always judging, always ensuring they understood. In Elena Frost's world, appearance meant nothing. Skill, resilience, and unyielding professionalism meant everything. When she finally gathered them after a grueling urban combat simulation, sweat dripping, muscles trembling, Elena's voice cut through the labored breathing. Every single error you made today could have killed someone in a real mission. Remember that, learn that, and if you do not, you will not survive. Understand? They nodded, too tired, too aware, too changed to speak. Their arrogance had been stripped layer by layer, replaced with respect forged under fire, training, and relentless pressure. The days blurred into nights, drills into live simulations, lessons into lifetimes compressed into hours. Elena observed, corrected, demanded, and watched the transformation unfold. Vance, Simmons, and Torres were no longer the men who had laughed at a stranger in a dive bar. They were becoming a unit, capable, aware, disciplined, and terrified of ever misjudging again. Every shout, every stern correction, every silent glance from Elena carried the weight of a career built in combat zones, in operations the world would never hear about. And they felt it every single moment. Stand down or stand strong, your choice. The sun had barely risen over the jagged coastline of the fictional Azuri Peninsula. Elena Frost stood atop the ridge, binoculars scanning the distant shipping lanes and desert-adjacent settlements that formed the mission objective. Her task force, transformed, disciplined, and still raw from the last 5 weeks of grueling training, stood at the ready. Dust swirled in the light breeze, carrying the smell of salt and sand, the tension palpable in every rigid posture, every gloved hand tightening on rifle grips. The team she had molded from arrogance into precision waited for her command. Eyes sharp, focus sharp, hearts steady, Elena barked, voice slicing through the pre-dawn stillness. Every syllable carried weight, authority, and an unspoken history of firefights, ambushes, and calculated risk. The soldiers who had once underestimated her, Vance, Simmons, Torres, felt the old tremors of fear that had haunted their early drills. Only now, fear was tempered with respect by understanding the cost of misjudgment. Elena signaled for forward movement, her eyes catching every detail. The narrow alleyways between shipping containers, the abandoned vehicles, the potential for hidden explosive devices. The insertion went flawlessly at first. Helicopters hummed overhead, ropes whipping in the wind as the team dropped into a staging area. Elena moved with quiet precision, scanning, adjusting, positioning her squad like chess pieces. Then the ambush struck. Explosions ripped through the compound, dust, fire, and chaos enveloping the task force. Automatic fire cut arcs of death across open terrain. Elena froze for less than a heartbeat, then pivoted, pulling Torres behind a stack of crates, shouting orders that cut through the screaming wind. "Suppress left! Cover the breach! Move!" Vance scrambled, heart hammering as bullets chipped concrete nearby. Memories of bar humiliation flashed, a lifetime ago, yet sharpened by adrenaline. He realized in a gut-wrenching instant that every mistake from those training weeks was now a lifeline lesson. Elena's voice was everywhere, shouting, commanding, precise, directing not only movement, but the mental clarity to survive. Simmons, pinned by fire near a doorway, froze for just a fraction, and Elena was there in an instant, dragging him to cover, adjusting his rifle, whispering, "Your hesitation kills you, yes, but also teaches you to act decisively next time." The terrain became a nightmare of sand, shipping containers, and rubble. Explosions shook the ground beneath them. Elena's task force adapted, moving with practiced synchronicity. The team who had once laughed at her now mirrored her calm decisiveness, reacting without prompting, anticipating her commands before they left her lips. Every corner cleared, every enemy suppressed, every wounded teammate stabilized was a testament to their transformation forged under relentless pressure. And then came the impossible twist, a secondary ambush. A narrow alley, insurgents firing from elevated positions, the extraction point compromised. Elena didn't hesitate. She calculated trajectories, adjusted positioning, and ordered a counterflank. Her voice rang sharp. "Vance, Simmons, cover fire. Torres, call for aerial support, now!" Bullets ricocheted, sand exploded into the sky, screams of simulated casualties blending with the roar of training pyrotechnics, yet every action was choreographed chaos. Torres, once drowning in fear, now shouted coordinates with clarity, guiding the aerial team in to neutralize the threat. Simmons moved like a machine, suppressing targets with precision. Vance led his squad forward with a controlled urgency that had been forged in the crucible of Elena's training. In the thick of it, Elena herself moved with lethal efficiency, each step measured, each angle calculated, every breath synchronized with the chaos around her. Her smaller frame moved like a ghost through smoke and fire, treating the wounded, directing fire, repositioning troops, and calculating risk faster than any human instinct might allow. The task force adapted, flowed, survived. Each correction she offered, sometimes shouted, sometimes whispered, sometimes silent, was a reminder of the lesson she had drilled into them. Respect is earned, performance is absolute, assumptions are deadly. As the mission climaxed, the extraction point loomed, a narrow strip where helicopters would lift them from the combat zone. Enemy fire intensified, RPGs streaking toward their position. Elena made a split-second decision, exposing herself to cover a team member while they loaded wounded onto the helicopters. Her action was deliberate, not reckless, a demonstration of command and trust. Vance and Simmons moved with the precision of men who had been broken, rebuilt, and tempered into warriors. Torres secured comms, coordinating with support elements to ensure extraction would succeed. And as the helicopters descended, Elena gave the final order, "Move, now!" The lift was chaotic. Dust, wind, and rotor wash lashed against their faces. Simmons, loaded onto the last litter, caught a glance at Elena as she covered their egress, rifle tracking the last threats. And in that instant, all doubt evaporated. The soldiers understood the full weight of her command, the culmination of training, pressure, and leadership distilled into a living, breathing standard. The extraction was perfect, executed under the most impossible circumstances. When the dust settled, the team huddled together, adrenaline slowly fading, lungs heaving, eyes wide. Elena's gaze swept over them, silent but full of acknowledgement. The men who had mocked her in a dive bar, underestimated her in every conceivable way, now looked at her not just with respect, but with the profound realization that capability is earned, not assumed. The psychological shift was complete, every laugh replaced by humility, every glance of doubt replaced by trust, every instinct sharpened to survival. Later, standing on the cliff above the extraction zone, Elena allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She scanned the horizon, the waves breaking against jagged rocks, and thought of the unseen costs, the sacrifices of the past that had shaped her, the comrades who would never see another sunrise. Every medal, every scar, every sleepless night had led to this moment. Command earned, respect demanded, lives preserved through discipline, courage, and the willingness to act when others hesitated. The team, now bonded through fire, trauma, and triumph, gathered their equipment, tending to the wounded and ensuring every element was accounted for. Elena walked among them, checking radios, gear, and morale. She paused at each of the three men who had once derided her, offering a nod, a silent acknowledgement of their journey from ignorance to respect. Words were unnecessary. The mission, the transformation, and the survival told the story far better than any speech ever could. As night fell over the Azuri Peninsula, the team consolidated, preparing for debriefs and planning their next operation. Elena looked to the horizon, a mix of reflection and determination in her gray eyes. She understood the weight of command, the cost of leadership, and the responsibility to mold those under her charge. Her task force had endured the impossible, survived ambushes, mastered fear, and learned that excellence is a habit, respect is a reward for performance, and underestimation a dangerous folly. In the quiet moments that followed, Elena revisited the memory of fallen comrades, faces burned into her mind from prior operations, lives lost, and lessons learned. Each one reminded her that what she commanded was more than just a mission, it was the trust of lives in her hands, a continuum of sacrifice and survival, and the responsibility to guide others with precision and courage. The transformation of her team, the respect earned through performance, and the flawless execution of impossible objectives were living proof that leadership is demonstrated, not proclaimed.